Hello everybody, this is Editing Sarah. I just want to give a disclaimer in this video really quick. This video we talk about 8 victims. A lot of these victims were into sex work, they were into drugs. I just want to say, just because what they chose in their life is not what you think should be chose, does not mean you should talk ill of them. So please keep all the negative comments out of the comments, keep them to yourself. These women don't need to be spoke about that way. And I just wanted to give that warning and give that to you guys to know that this video does have that involved and that you should not say anything about it. So thank you. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. So today's video, the Jennings 8. So the Jennings 8, there are 8 victims, hence the name, and they are 8 women. But before we get into that, I do need to say that the women in this case range from the ages of 30 to 17. The youngest victim was 17 at the time of death. And they were all sex workers and had drug addiction issues. So before we get into the video, I do want to say, please do not be in the comments and saying what they were doing with their life is wrong. We don't know what was going on in their lives to make them choose that line of work. Also, being a sex worker should not determine whether or not you get a solved case. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't get the police work that you deserve. You still deserve the justice that most people get. So, that being said, please keep your negative comments to yourself and just don't talk about their line of work. So the Jennings 8, or the Jeff Davis 8, is what they're called because Jennings is the county that they were from and Jeff Davis is the sheriff's office. So between the years 2005 and 2009, 8 women from the town of Jennings, Louisiana, and Jefferson Davis Parish were murdered, and their bodies were dumped in crawfish ponds or canals, and police assumed this was a serial killer. They just believed it was a serial killer because of how many victims there were and the time in between killings, and it's been a decade. The last murder was in 2009. It has been 12 years. Almost 13 years since the last victim. It's been over a decade, and this is still unsolved. So, though the victim's cause of death varied, a lot of them were asphyxiated, and 2 had their throats slit. They all had something in common. They were all from South Jennings. All the victims were from South Jennings, which is the poorer side of Jennings County, and they all knew each other. Every victim knew each other. So, all these women were living in poverty and had criminal records, filled with drug use and petty crimes. But they all had one thing in common, besides the living in the same place or knowing each other, the drug or the criminal record. They all snitched about the Jennings drug trade. They basically snitched on the drug trade to get time off their sentences or to just not be associated. So the first victim of the Jennings 8, or the Jeff Davis 8, was found in May of 2005. The man who discovered the body was fishing at the time, and he genuinely thought the woman's body was a mannequin. Dead bodies eventually lose their color. Most humans have a color to them, whether that be red or hints of red or hints of tan. You lose that all. You look like a white goat. You look like a sheet of paper after you die because your blood drains. The man said he thought the body was a mannequin in the water until he saw the flies. And he said, "I saw flies, and mannequins don't attract flies." So, law enforcement used fingerprint technology to identify the first victim. The woman was 28-year-old Loretta Lynn Chison Lewis. Yes, that's her full name. She was a local sex worker and found there was no leads to point to who killed Loretta Lynn. So, Loretta wouldn't be the only victim. She was the first of 8 in the course of 4 years. 7 more women died after her, all of them being murdered. I'm going to list off the next 7 and a little bit about them. So the first that I have is Ernestine Marie Daniels Patterson. She was 30 years old. Ernestine was born on September 11th, 1974. She was last seen on June 16th, 2005, and was found June 18th, 2005. Kristen Gary Lopez, 21 years old, was born on November 27th, 1985. She was last seen March 6th, 2007, and her body was found on March 18th, 2007. Whitney DuBois was 26 years old, and she was last seen on May 7th. Her remains were found on May 12th, 2007, and she is considered the 4th victim of the Jennings Eight. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this woman's name right, but her nickname is what I'll probably be calling her, Lasonia or Muggy Brown. She was 23 years old. Muggy was last seen on May 27th, 2008. Around 2 a.m. that same night, a police officer came across her body in the middle of East Rocca Road. She had been doused in bleach and her throat slit. So she is the only one that was not found in a pond or a canal. Crystal Shea Benoit Zeno was 24 years old. She was born on July 24th, 1984. She was last seen August 29th of 2008, and her body was found on September 11th of 2000. Brittany Gary is the youngest victim. She was 17 years old. I couldn't imagine being 17 and this happening. Brittany Gary was born on August 23rd, 1991, and she was last seen on November 2nd, 2008, and her body was found November 11th, 2008. And last but certainly not least, Nicole Gilroy was 26 years old. She was seen by her mother on August 16th, 2009, and was found 3 days later on August 19th, 2009. Nicole was nude from the waist down, and her cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation. So it wasn't until December of 2008, after 7 women had already been killed, that a task force was composed of federal, state, and local law enforcement. So the FBI, state, and local law enforcement for Louisiana got together, and they made an attempt to finally catch the person responsible for these murders. And authorities told the public they were most likely looking for a serial killer. Then journalist Ethan Brown arrived in Jennings in 2012. So this is 7 years after the first victim, after Loretta was found. And Ethan began his own investigation. This led to a book deal and to a docuseries on Showtime called Murder in the Bayou. I do believe it is on Hulu, so if you have Hulu, you can go and watch it. The docuseries aired in 2019, and even years later, it's been, 3 years since 2019, this case is still unsolved. Millions of people have probably already seen the docuseries, and this case is still unsolved. So Ethan makes a kind of compelling case against the idea that the killings were that of a serial killer, or of a single person. So he makes a case against, I don't think it's one person. So the more Ethan looked into the case, the more he found misconduct and corruption within the police departments that were assigned to these cases, assigned to these women's cases, and the people that were entrusted with these women's cases to solve them. So Ethan said it should have been obvious all along that these deaths were not the handiwork of a serial killer, and then went on to say, according to the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit's own research, serial killings typically involve strangers with no visible connection between the offender and the victim. The women themselves all knew one another intimately. Most of the time, serial killers don't go for people that know each other and all that. So, Kristen Gary Lopez and Brittany Gary were cousins. And Brittany Gary and Crystal Bonet had been roommates. And aside from two of them being cousins and two of them being roommates, they all engaged in sex work at some seedy hotel in Jennings. And all of them, except one, which was Ernestine Patterson, had been involved with an infamous local pimp and strip club owner named Frankie Richard. At one point, Frankie Richard was actually charged with murder in one of the murder cases, but the police had to drop it when witness statements conflicted and evidence was mishandled. So, like, the witness statements, they were like, no, Frankie couldn't have done this, and then there was evidence that was mishandled. Two other men were also arrested in the murder of Ernestine, which is the first woman or the second woman we discussed, but the charges were also dropped. Ethan's investigation led to find that every one of the victims had offered up information on a prior murder, and then ended up dead themselves. So each woman had offered up information of the prior murder, and then was murdered themselves. I do not know if this is true for Loretta Lynn. She was the first victim, and there was no victim prior to her that we know of. Little do we know that there could probably be 8 more out there that nobody has talked about. So, his investigation unearthed a number of local residents pointing to the law enforcement of being responsible for these murders. So one of the victims herself, Nicole Gilroy, the last victim, reportedly told her mother it was police killing the other girls. It wasn't some random man or some random woman. It was the police killing these women. Nicole also celebrated her 27th birthday reluctantly. She told her mother, "It doesn't matter, I'm not going to be here." And then she went on to place her 4 children with relatives. So she celebrated her birthday, but she never got to turn 27. Told her mother it wouldn't matter, she wouldn't be here, and then she placed her 4 children with family. So the strip club owner, Frankie Richard, told Ethan Nicole knew a whole lot about a whole lot. So we can gather from this that Nicole probably knew a little bit more about these killings than the rest of the victims did. So relatives of the other victims, the other, 7, said the same thing, that each one of these victims, each one of these women shared a very similar story of, oh, well, they're going to kill me, somebody's going to kill, like, I've shared information, like, I'm going to be killed. The 5th victim, Muggy, apparently told one of the witnesses from the task force that had been put together to solve these cases that 3 police officers were going to kill her. Each of the victims spent time in the local jails. And reports say that jailers in the Jefferson Davis Parish often trafficked female inmates for sex. And this included a few of the victims. It was not named which victims. That's privacy that they deserve. So the Jennings Police Department and Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Office were both overly corrupt. There were multiple officers charged with many different things, all within the 1990s. Only like 5 years, all but almost 10 years prior to these murders, these 2 offices were just corrupt as could be. So, that being said that they were corrupt, in 2007, Sergeant Jesse Ewing discovered that 2 female inmates at the city jail had information on the murders. At the time that he found out that there were 2 women in the local jail that had information on these murders, there were only 4 murders at the time. So only 4 of these women had been murdered at the time. They wanted to talk to Jesse Ewing about this. They were like, hey, we've got information, we'll share it. So Jesse had this recorded, and the 2 women told Jesse that higher ranking officers covered up the murders. So remember, we just talked about that both of these police departments were corrupt, and here they are covering up, at the time, 4 murders. Jesse did not trust his colleagues. He did not trust the police officers he was working with that were a part of these police departments. So he delivered the tapes to a local PI. And this local PI delivered the tapes to the FBI. And the FBI turned around and handed them right to the task force that Jesse did not trust with these audio tapes. Like, he 100% did not trust these men with these tapes. Men and women. I don't know if there's women. Jesse was then charged with wrongdoing in the office and sexual misconduct, and was terminated from his job. Now, please tell me where the sexual misconduct comes into this, because he literally just talked to these women who knew about the murders. These tapes were never released to the public. We don't know what these women said on the tapes, though it did say in my research that the tapes were backed up by witness statements and what the task force had already known. But then again, we don't know for sure because they're fucking corrupt. Oops. So through Ethan's investigation, he learned that Louisiana Congressman Charles Bostani, don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, a lot of French names, had allegedly had sex with 3 of the victims. So 3 of these women he had sex with allegedly. At the motel the girls worked at, that I talked about earlier in the video, all these women worked at the same hotel, and allegedly 3 of them had sex with the congressman at the hotel they worked at. So the congressman knew who owned the hotel. So after Ethan found this out and he was like, oh, the congressman had sex with them, he said it in the book he had made. He said it in the docuseries. The congressman had tried to sue Ethan for defamation of character, but dropped the lawsuit after losing the next election. Well, I mean, if you're running for office, you probably shouldn't have that on you, but this case has barely anything on it. There's no evidence pointing to who did it. There's nothing discussing this case. And in 2009, the same year that the last victims were killed, in response to the public, like, just battering these cops with, like, we want to know who did this, like, was it you, like, just tell us the truth, DNA tests were performed on local law enforcement to prove that it wasn't them, but then that they never shared these tests with the public. Like, they took the test and then just, we're not going to share them with you. So Frankie Richards, the strip club owner, also seems to have just eluded any charge on him. Like, any further charge that the cops had to put on him, he eluded them. So in 2007, Frankie Richards, the strip club owner, had a rape charge that he beat. Because he allegedly threatened the victim, saying, if you tell anyone, bitch, you will end up like the others. Don't know who he said this to, but he said it to one of the victims. Yeah. And that's the last anybody's really heard of this case. Until the docuseries came out in 2019, 10 years after the DNA tests that were done on the cops, nobody knows who killed these 8 women. Nobody knows why it was only those 8. And we don't know if there was anything further. Like, were there more victims that they didn't talk about? Because I read that the Jennings County Police Department had 20 unsolved murders. And they're a small county of like 10,000 people. 20 unsolved murders is quite a lot for such a small community. These 8 women deserve justice. It doesn't matter that they were sex workers. It doesn't matter that they even struggled with a drug addiction. Their lives mattered, and the cops are so damn corrupt that they don't believe so. Like I said, a couple of these women had children. One of them had 4 kids that she placed with family. These women, a few of them had kids. I couldn't imagine what it was like for their kids to grow up knowing that their mother was murdered, and there's nothing for them to even talk about. This is the first unsolved case I've done on my channel too. So they deserve their own video, and I know for a fact that if there is ever an update on this case, you guys will be getting that video. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know that it was short and there was a lot of information in such a short period of time, but thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a good day, and bye. See you guys later.